Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. It is our weekend edition. Usually around the table we have Kelly Shackelford and Penna Dexter, but they are both at the Values Voter Summit, and we are going to actually hear a live report from Penna Dexter in just a few minutes, who is going to tell us what has been taking place up there. But oftentimes when they're away, we have Debbie Georgatos in studio with us, and she is the author of the book, Ladies, Can We Talk? A talk show host herself and a frequent guest here on Point of View. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
As a matter of fact, we might as well hand out a program here. We are going to have a lot of voices and a lot of guests today. So hang on, because the first one in studio with us is Marjorie Dannenfelser, and she is the president of Susan B. Anthony List. And she is an individual that has grown that organization to 365,000 members nationwide, helped elect at least 97 different pro-life candidates. And I guess the last time you and I talked was at the Values Voter Summit.
That's right. It's been a long time since then. I've really been looking forward to being here. Thank you.
Well, we are grateful that you are here. We're going to have a number of other guests join us in studio, some by phone. And so I should get out one of those baseball programs, because you'll just have to keep track of all of that. We're going to spend a little bit of time before we get into some of these pro-life issues, because that's very important in talking about some of the campaigns. And we tried last week, Debbie, to talk about a few of the campaigns, but we're going to get some experts here that can get into it in such detail. So that will be helpful to help us out. But I thought I would mention that today has been, for those of you listening in certain parts of the country, a disaster for travel. This has also been the day of just wacko people. This individual actually stabbed himself, started a fire at the Aurora Traffic Control Center, and so as a result, no planes went into Chicago or out of Chicago. So if you have looked at a map that they sometimes post here of where planes are, you see this vast hole around Midway and O'Hare and a little bit over Detroit, and so they are just now getting some of those flights back. And so anybody that was flying anywhere in the country that had to go through Chicago, our prayers are for you, because the lines are as long as they possibly can. And it just shows what one individual can do, disrupt the system. And then this other one that is troubling, which we'll get into maybe in future programs, an individual in Oklahoma City went crazy, beheaded a woman. They have not said the name of the individual. I think when we hear that name, we might have an idea of who that is, but nevertheless, a lot of really crazy things have been happening today. We're not going to spend much more time talking about that, but Debbie just illustrates again, we've got to be ever vigilant in all the things that are happening, and how some of these individuals have completely disrupted the lives of people today.
They certainly have, and it's very sad, and your heart even actually goes out to the people, well, certainly to the man who was attempting suicide, obviously troubled individual. But yes, unfortunate for all of us, we have to keep on our toes.
Well, yesterday we did talk about Eric Holder stepping down, and I just wanted to spend a minute or two more with you, Debbie, talking about this, because as a lawyer and as somebody who's really been following some of these cases, here is an attorney general that decided not to defend the Defense of Marriage Act, not to deal with all sorts of issues. Of course, we can talk about Fast and Furious, we can talk about the IRS, we can go through a very long list. But you've actually put together some numbers to help us understand the, I think you'd have to say, sad legacy of this attorney general.
That is a great way to say it, a sad legacy. This has to do with the cases that were reversed, or the cases in which the United States Supreme Court ruled against the position of the Obama administration. And of course, that happens to every president. But Eric Holder is the number one lawyer advising the Obama administration. That's his job. And this president has the highest number of unanimous Supreme Court reversals of his positions of any president. That's a lot, because you have Supreme Court justices overturn things all the time, but the numbers are pretty high. I don't think it's that interesting to most of your listeners to go through the details of the cases, but I think that just, in fact, if you Google that, Ted Cruz, our U.S. Senator from Texas, has been keeping a running log with great detail in it about those cases and how often the Supreme Court unanimously, so even the liberals on the court, reverse this president. I don't know if you want to talk right now about the little bit of lack of real justice here, but
that's a good one. Yeah, get to that one.
Okay. Many of us heard over the last several years about something that was referred to as the knockout game, and it's not a game. It's a violent attack. It is a surprise random attack of a complete stranger, walking up to a stranger and punching him and knocking him out, and in many cases ending up killing the victim. And this was a big trendy thing to do for young gangs, often videotape put up on YouTube, taunting and laughing, racial taunts happening. This conduct happened in at least 15 states, and there were, every case that you read about involved, unfortunately, the perpetrator, the young people engaged in this conduct, being black and the victims being white. And it was part of the whole knockout game idea. But there was one case in which, out of all those cases, but clearly racial pattern was clear, but only one case in which Eric Holder, as our Attorney General, decided to prosecute, and that involved the one case in which the perpetrator, the wrongdoer, was Caucasian. And the victim was, actually, I said earlier he was black. I think he may have been a kind of a mixed race individual, but the whole point being racial conduct, ongoing, bad, clearly wrong, was not prosecuted by this Attorney General except when the bad guy was white. And it really, it's not, it just sets a bad tone about our country. It exaggerates and instills racial suspicion and racial tension. It's a very unfortunate legacy for him to leave.
Well, and again, sometimes he would look at it through the black-white prism, because when we had the Black Panthers in front of that voter location, he decided not to prosecute that. When you got to the voter ID laws, some of those voter ID laws in some of those states were actually proposed by African Americans, but nevertheless used the Voter Rights Act to say, no, those are unconstitutional, where he had some authority to do so. So this has been a politicized Attorney General's office in ways that go all the way back maybe to George Mitchell, or somebody like that during Watergate, maybe Ed Meese during Reagan, but I would have to think you'd have to go all the way back to George Mitchell or back to some of the scandals during the Harding administration to find somebody as egregiously politicizing this particular office. And so in some respects, there are a lot of people saying, glad to see you go.
There certainly are. It seems to have set race relations in America back, and that's a very sad thing.
Going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to spend some time, first of all, talking about what has happened in the Values Voter Summit in Washington, D.C., and Penna Dexter will join us. But then we're going to go around the roundtable here and begin to talk about some of these races. And is pro-life a positive in these races or a negative? And what kind of message do we need to encourage some of these candidates to actually explain and to propose? So that's going to be a very significant part of our conversation today, because of two of the guests we have in studio, another one we're going to have in studio in just a few minutes, and then one by phone. Like I said, get your scorecard out so you can keep track of all the people, but you're going to learn quite a bit. On our Point of View website today, you will see that we have one article about Eric Holder, then one on abortion and midterm elections, and we'll be talking with Marjorie about that one in just a minute. Should we hope to die at 75? What about this issue of end-of-life issues? And then also some others having to do with foreign policy, one by Charles Kruthammer called Containment Plus. And we also have links to all of the various organizations we're going to be talking about today, the Susan B. Anthony List, America Principles Project, Evolving Strategies, and of course one on the Values Voter Summit. So lots of material. You might as well get to the website right now. This is a way you'll be able to keep track of all the things we're going to be talking about, and we'll continue our conversation with our roundtable guests right after this.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about the new book by Gary Chapman and Arlene Pellicane, Growing Up Social, Raising Relational Kids in a Screen-Driven World. Today, I'd like to come back to one arresting set of statistics that illustrated the importance of reading. If you look at the latest statistics from the Kaiser Family Foundation on media, you will see that over the last decade, every form of media consumption has increased from children ages 8 to 18. Hours watching television have increased, and so have hours spent in front of a computer, video game, and many other digital devices. Only one activity has decreased: reading. In their book, they cite a study that demonstrates the importance of reading at home. Consider this comparison of three students with three very different reading habits. Student A reads 20 minutes a day, which works out to be 3,600 minutes per school year. Student A also encounters about 1,800,000 words, and even more encouraging is the claim that this student will eventually score in the 90th percentile on standardized tests. Student B reads 5 minutes a day. That works out to 900 minutes per school year. The student encounters about 282,000 words and is likely to score in the 50th percentile on standardized tests. And student C reads an average of 1 minute a day. That works out to merely 180 minutes per school year. And student C only encounters about 8,000 words per year, and this student is likely to score in the 10th percentile on standardized tests. This comparison and other studies that show the importance of reading illustrate one of the greatest dangers in a digital world. Children are reading less because digital devices are distracting them and enticing them. We face some significant challenges in this digital age. The decline in reading is one of the greatest concerns. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Weekend edition, and certainly this is an opportunity when we normally hear from Kelly Shackelford and Penna Dexter. She is actually at the Values Voter Summit, so in studio with us today, Marjorie Dannenfelser, as well as Debbie Georgatos. And Penna, how's it going there at the Values Voter Summit?
Well, it's lots of fun here, Kerby, but I don't know. It might be just as fun to be around your table with Debbie and Marjorie. It's great to talk to all of you. And I'd say there are a couple thousand people here and about 300 press, so it's a pretty big deal here at the Values Voter Summit.
Well, Marjorie, you've been there before. Matter of fact, like I said, the last time we did an interview was there. All sorts of activities that take place at the summit, right?
Yes, it's a go-to press spot because of who's there. So 300 media is not normal at every conservative function. I think we all know that. But they know that there's something to cover. And what's to cover there are the plans that the conservative movement has for winning on November the 4th. Not just the conservative movement generally, but where values will impact the voter and how that will affect the elections. It's that great last stop to get all excited and generated, make your plans for Election Day, and then just go back with all pistons running and win.
Penn, I'd love to get your assessment there. Is there encouragement? Is there hope? Or is there a discouraged group of individuals? What have you found?
Hope and a lot of excitement, and Marjorie is absolutely right about it being the last stop before the elections, but it's very interesting because it's the first stop for the 2016 presidential election also, and that's the reason I say that is because of the speakers this morning. Tony Perkins, the president of Family Research Council, started out. Of course, he said, in his typical dry sense of humor, that he said this was not a going-away party for Eric Holder.
Great line.
But we went on to hear from some great people, and then the person that really filled the room was none other than our friend Ted Cruz, who was introduced by Brent Bozell from the Media Research Center. And Brent comes up to the stage with a baby pouch and a little baby, one of his little tiny grandbabies, named Max. And he whispered something in Max's ear, and he said Max had something to tell us. And he was going to tell us what that was. And guess what? It was run, Ted, run. Immediately, Ted Cruz comes up to the podium and gave... It was a campaign speech, guys. It just really was, and it was, typical in his fashion, just fabulously put together, covered the gamut. National security is a big theme here, even though this is a family conference. It's running all the way through it, and he certainly did that part, and a lot about the people that are imprisoned for their faith around the world. For instance, Pastor Saeed Abedini in Iran. There's some other prisoners in Mexico, Cuba. And, of course, the person who is going to get an award tomorrow night at the gala is Miriam Ibrahim. And so that was a big part of his speech, but it was rousing. And, of course, he promised, as you do in all campaign speeches, made some promises, and one was to repeal every jot and tittle of Obamacare.
I figured he would do that.
Cruz.
Now, we always like to talk a little bit about the controversy. Rick Santorum apparently criticized Ted Cruz because Ted Cruz was at that event that was dealing with Christians that were being persecuted. And at one point when he was booed, he said, well, if you won't stand with Israel, I won't stand with you. And it seems to me that Rick Santorum decided to use that to make a different point.
Did that happen here at the summit? Because I'm away from the meeting room, and Rick Santorum's supposed to be speaking in this half hour, so I've actually missed that part. So you're giving me some news. I guess
and when you're there, you really actually can. You know better what's going on sometimes by listening to the radio. I know. Walking up and down the halls, half the times I'm missing the main things. Have to read them in the news.
Well, if that's the only controversy, we're pretty good. Yeah, but I mean, again, it just illustrates that I think it's at least a possibility that Rick Santorum's running again. What do you think?
I think so, and because it's been a sort of a morning of campaign speeches, as I said. It was. Well, I'll tell you something interesting about the Rick Perry part of it that is just a theory of mine, but we also had Rand Paul speak, and our friend Jerry Johnson, president of the National Religious Broadcasters, was interesting to me. He introduced Rand Paul, and Rand Paul's speech was very, very thoughtful, filled with Christian theology, also a lot of national security because he has to burnish those credentials, and certainly he has said he supports going after ISIS, but Congress should declare that. And he talked about his theme that he frequently mentions about foreign aid, and just talking about if any country has any prisoners, religious prisoners in their country, they should not get foreign aid from us, which really is a no-brainer. And he did a nice job. But the reason that I say that it was a campaign speech is because there was a very nicely made video that was part of his speech, and at the bottom it said Rand Paul 2016.
Wow.
Seems pretty direct.
I'd say it's pretty direct.
So this is heading towards 2016 at this Values Voters Summit.
One of the things, Penna, we're going to be talking about today, because we have quite a roundtable to really illustrate this issue of pro-life, is this has been, I think, by the establishment Republicans, is portrayed as something that's a negative, and yet I think everybody around the table says it's a real positive. What kind of pro-life comments have you heard so far?
Well, every candidate has, and every speaker has brought up a pro-life message. From Michelle Bachmann, who was the final speech of the morning, and she's just kind of a darling of FRC and was saying goodbye since she's leaving Congress. I think she'll have some other things to do after that, though. But also there was a beautiful video about a success story with adult stem cell research, and a young woman who was cured of lupus, a terrible, terrible case of it. And it was beautifully done, so that was a pro-life theme there. And then we had David Dewhurst, the lieutenant governor of Texas, and this is where the Rick Perry comes in. I'm thinking that Rick Perry must have not been able to come or chosen not to, because with all these other presidential hopefuls here, Dewhurst was right in the middle of that, and I thought that was strange. But there was a lot made of the fight in Texas to get some very, very common sense restrictions on abortion. and the battle that took place. And he did a very good job on that as our lieutenant governor in Texas.
Well, again, we've talked about some of those battles. Marjorie, of course, you live in Washington, D.C., but you're well aware of the battle we had down here in Texas. And one of the people that was involved in this filibuster is running for governor. And so that's become a big issue in not only the governor's campaign, but a lot of these senatorial campaigns around the country, hasn't it?
Indeed. In some ways, we must thank her because she has placed her platform on a very unpopular place, and that is late-term abortion. To do that is very unwise. It raised her a whole boatload of money in the very beginning, and then she had to bury it somehow and call herself even pro-life in one case, meaning pro-life meaning I like life, or in a general abstract sense, right?
Yeah.
But what's very important is that this is an opportunity for our candidates, including Greg Abbott, to go on the offense, to exploit our opponents' negatives, where it is very clear and obvious that the public, including women, including Democrats, including Hispanics, are opposed to such extreme late-term abortion, taxpayer-funded. Frankly, most people don't even know it exists, and it has become a very important issue in Washington, D.C., in the Senate races around the country, and very definitely here, where we must win. And when we win, we need to show that this is part of the reason, because she's not only acting in an anti-life way, she's acting in an anti-woman way, because of the way that abortion impacts women.
You know, Debbie, I was at Council for Life yesterday, and they had a banquet over in Fort Worth because they're establishing one over there. And one of the things I said was, we really have been winning the war of ideas. You have more pregnancy resource clinics in America than you have abortion clinics. The younger you are, the more likely you are to be pro-life. I'll go through the long list. You know it as well as I do. And it just seems to me that some of the candidates haven't gotten the memo, and they think I just need to hide being pro-life at a time when America seems to be becoming more pro-life.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. In fact, I had a conversation recently with a real political activist about my new radio show. She was asking about it, and she said, well, you don't talk about abortion, do you? Because that's very unpopular. I said, actually, I talk about all issues. I think every issue matters to women, including that. I think that was a common kind of enlightened view within Republican strategists, is just kind of stay away from those touchy issues and stick with the economy and strong national defense. But I do think, well, exactly what you just said, Marjorie, I think that Wendy Davis filibuster and the fact that what she was defending was late-term abortion, this gives us a great opportunity to talk about what the reality is in America, what kind of abortion is legal and who's funding it, and what Democrats really stand for. They've been successful over decades of changing the language and using terms like reproductive justice and standing for women's health, when what they really mean is we defend late-term abortion. And I think it's great that she's given us a chance, candidates a chance to talk about that.
Well, Penna, we thank you for giving us a great update on the Values Voters Summit. When you get back into Dallas, we need to get a full report. But appreciate being the eyes and ears for us today there at Point of View.
I will give you a full report. I might mention that there's a lot about the intramural Republican debates being talked about here, because people are really sick and tired of the establishment Republicans ignoring or downplaying some of our key issues that actually do attract the average American, like the sanctity of human life. So that's kind of what's going on here, and I certainly will be happy to come back and give you a report on the rest of the weekend.
Well, I'm glad you're up there, and thank you for calling in today. When we come back, we're going to spend some time looking at this pro-life issue, bring another guest around the round table, and talk about some of these very important races and what you can do to elect individuals that support life and family and all the values we talk about here on Point of View. If you'd like to get some more information about some of the individuals we will be talking with and some of the articles, you can go to our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back with more right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, we have a full round table. Debbie, this gets more interesting by the minute, doesn't it? And we have one
Too
more
much
guest.
fun.
It's all sorts of fun. Debbie Georgatos with us always. And then we also have Marjorie Dannenfelser, who is the president of Susan B. Anthony List. And as we mentioned just a minute ago, very much involved in many of these campaigns. But we also now bring to the microphone, and you can watch on our live cast here, Frank Cannon, who is the president of American Principles Project and is the co-author of the report, Building a Winning GOP Coalition Lessons of 2012. has been involved in all sorts of different activities. One of his past clients, Trafficking Office of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Of course, you work with Susan B. Anthony, List, and others. And so, Frank, let's get you close to the microphone, but thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
I want to go around the round table, and Marjorie, start us off, because when we talk about this pro-life issue, we hear from so many people, and I think Debbie gave that just a minute ago. Abortion, that's really controversial. But it seems to me that in most of the races you're watching right now, being pro-life and being able to articulate that in a way where you don't end up in a gully or a chuck hole or something like that is a winning strategy, and that's what you've been telling many of these pro-life candidates, right?
Well, without question, that's our business, is endorsing candidates and helping them get elected. And so part of our business is helping them along and digging down and figuring out what they know, what do they believe, how do you say it, how do you say it quickly and articulately in a way that really reflects what you truly believe, and then stop.
And stop.
And then stop, which is sometimes tough because you hear a little air sometimes after you stop, right? And air is to be avoided in general. But what the risk is that if you haven't prepared ahead of time, you'll continue to talk and talk and talk and talk and talk. And if you talk that long, there will be something that can be used against you. But more important is to go on the offense. In all the races that we're involved in, the incumbents will be in big trouble when their voters know what their actual position is for late-term abortion. In other words, in red states, that's not a place you want to be.
Yes, and so again, when in the state of Texas, we've talked about when you say that you would ban abortions after the 20th week, or I love to say after the 5th month or something like that. Really
halfway
gets
through pregnancy,
right. It really gets people like, whoa, yeah.
Yes.
I mean, that's a negative rather than a positive, right?
Indeed. We all have seen sonograms. You get to know your brother or sister first through a sonogram, almost always. It's a different world we're living in now. That's why young people are more pro-life than any other demographic. Frank,
I'd love to get your comments. What about this? Because it seems to me that putting your opponent on defense, I should say, and going on offense is a very effective strategy that we haven't seen very much.
Absolutely. The problem is that if you're talking about rape and incest, you're talking about something that no one really wants to be engaged in. If you're talking about late-term abortions, the dynamic is that people support you. And so you want to be on an issue where a majority of the public supports you. And it's particularly important in a state like Texas, where an issue like that is transformative to the voting patterns of Hispanics and other people who are necessary to maintain a Republican coalition or a conservative coalition.
What about the Senate race in Colorado right now? It seems to me that the opponent or the incumbent of the Republican opponent is trying to make a big deal about the fact that he believes that we should have a personhood amendment or a personhood bill. I don't know. I'd own that, don't you think? It'd be something to own?
It's something to own, and it's certainly something that I support. It is not the grounds on which Cory Gardner wanted to debate.
Yes.
Because he found himself in a place that he thought it was a minority position. So he ought to be talking about the negatives of his opponent. He ought to be talking about what's your position on late-term abortion. That's where we need to go. All of these races, as you know, are up and down 1 point, 2 points, 3 points. They're all so close. This can be the winning issue in each of these elections if we stay focused.
Debbie, you've read this article here in New York Times, and we've posted this because it quotes quite a bit Marjorie, so we got a chance to learn a little bit more. But I love the idea. Give your answer, stop talking. What are your thoughts?
Absolutely. You know, what happened, unfortunately, in past elections, that a few Republicans said things that were a little bit unfortunate, and they didn't even really mean the way it came out and sounded. Sure. So it is good. I love Marjorie's point about think ahead, what exactly it is you want to say it well. And, you know, if it's just, I support life. And now, one little point I love making is that the left has tried to say for years that being pro-woman meant being pro-choice. And we need to sever that. You know, we're in favor, we're pro-women, we're pro-mom, we're pro-child, we're pro-life. It's a positive thing. And I agree wholeheartedly with the negative of, and my opponent supports late term, or as it's sometimes called, partial birth abortion. My opponent supports that.
Wow.
You got that right.
What about the war on women? I want to go to you, Marjorie, and then Frank as well. Why does the Democratic Party keep coming back to this war on women? I don't know how it worked well the first time, but all the evidence now seems to suggest it's not working at all in this campaign.
That's right. Well, it does go to show that if you say the same thing over and over and over and over again, people don't know what you're talking about anymore, but they repeat it. War on women. Even we're saying war on women. They did a great job of branding. But we do know that the real war is against is the Democratic war on women. That really has turned out to be the case. And I think the evidence just wasn't coming in on that side. I think it's overused. It's not working in Colorado. Definitely that's, and it's an opportunity for us to talk about what are women's real needs. Do we have other issues in addition to our reproductive organs? We also might have osteoporosis. You know, is it all about abortion? That's what it was. So our ability to go on offense, talk about those candidates' negatives, and talk about the rest of what women really care about is the way to really take that label away.
Frank, any comments about the war on women?
Well, I think Marjorie's hit it exactly on the head, is that the antidote is not to appear defensive in any way. You made this point in regard to personhood. When you try to avoid an issue and people are being told, say as little as possible, but pivot away from the issue, don't own the issue. Mm-hmm. When you do that, your own base is demoralized. Your opponent's base is energized, and the people in the middle are rightly suspicious that you don't actually believe your own position. That's what happens all the time. When you go on the offensive and you make the case, people are going to respect that, particularly if you go so much on the offensive that you take the message directly to people in the other party. For example, 30% of Democrats are self-identified pro-lifers.
There's a good point.
We talk about micro-targeting. What they're doing here in Texas that's so exciting is micro-targeting Hispanics and women through a program that people can access by going to OperationTexas.com, where the goal is to not only go on the offensive in your argument, but micro-target people who believe this, who have never heard the message before.
We're going to talk with Adam Schaeffer a little bit later about that in some detail, and I went again for people in other states to learn some lessons. Debbie, you've seen how sometimes when we have been able to pass legislation here to ban third trimester abortion, things like that, we said, use this model legislation in your own state, because we're in 43 states, and you can learn some lessons from other states and actually export that. But I think Frank had a good point. Demoralizing your base. That's another issue here. And you've been around me long enough. They haven't heard me say this. I say it too often. But, you know, politics is more about intensity than it is about numbers. Ultimately, it is numbers. But intensity, those are the people that are going to go out and knock on doors. Those are the people that are going to put up signs. And if you keep hiding your pro-life convictions, a lot of pro-life activists just going to stay home.
I completely agree with that. I just think there are many women and men, just voters, who want to hear some passionate defense of life. They do feel concerned about the numbers of abortions, the late term, the funding with taxes. They want to hear someone say, yeah, I love life. We support life for women and children. Back to your question quickly about why the liberals go back to war on women. It's because what else do they have to talk about? The economy is horrible. Our foreign policy is a disaster. The world's far worse off. This is a long-term left-wing strategy of dividing Americans and trying to make women feel like they're victims, and we're here to rescue you. It's a tactic, and we need to attack it when we hear it. We don't just let it go on. We need to say there is no war on women except in the made up, in a fantasy world that the left has made up. And every issue is a women's issue. We need to be talking in a positive way about our issues, our values, embrace and support women in every way.
We need to mention again your book, Ladies, Can We Talk? Because one of the things you've said on this program, and you say almost every week on your own radio program, is every issue is a woman's issue.
Amen.
So, yeah. Not just the pro-life issues, not just Obamacare and everything. But when we come back, I do want to talk about that, because we learned that now, guess what? No real surprise here, that what we certainly feared is that we are paying for abortions through some of these various subsidies. So we're going to talk about that. But let's also open up the phones to give you a chance to join our conversation today. 1-800-351-1212. And Frank mentioned the name, and so let me give it again, OperationTexas.org, OperationTexas.org. And we'll also put that link up there, along with the links we already have for Susan B. Anthony List, American Principles Project, Evolving Strategies, and the Values Voter Summit. There's quite a lot today, so you need to go to the website and click on every one of those links, and we'll come back and we'll take some of your phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. Be right back.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of President Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty. Since its inception, we've spent $22 trillion on it. Last year alone, we spent $943 billion on federal and state welfare programs. And what do we have to show for it? The U.S. Census Bureau recently released its annual report on the poverty rate. It shows that there's really no change. Around 14% of Americans are still poor. But if we look at the standard of living of those classified as poor by the Census Bureau, we see a very different picture than we did back in the 60s. The Heritage Foundation's premier poverty expert, Robert Rector, points out that census counts a family as poor if its income falls below specified thresholds. But in counting family income, census ignores nearly this entire $943 billion welfare state. According to Heritage, over 100 million people, about a third of the American population, received aid from at least one of the nation's 80 means-tested welfare programs in 2013. This statistic does not include Social Security, Medicare, or unemployment insurance. As a result, the actual living conditions of those classified as poor have been improving for decades. Less than 2% of the poor are homeless. The typical person defined as poor lives in a home that is in good repair, not crowded, and larger than the average dwelling of a non-poor French, German, or English citizen. Robert Rector also points out that this census-identified poor family's home has air conditioning, cable or satellite TV, and a computer. 40% have a widescreen HDTV, and another 40% have internet access. 3/4 have a car. About 2/3 have 2 or more cars. Surveys by the U.S. Department of Agriculture show the poor mostly reporting that they were not hungry even for a day during the prior year. It's good that Americans are not suffering from deprivation the way they were decades ago, but this is not because more people are providing better lives for themselves and their families. The war on poverty was declared to increase self-sufficiency, not to create a bigger and bigger welfare state with more and more people dependent upon the government. President Johnson declared that the war on poverty would shrink the welfare rolls. It hasn't happened. So is the war on poverty a failure because the poverty rate is virtually unchanged? Or is it a success because poverty isn't nearly as terrible as it was before these programs began? It's a failure. Its programs have discouraged work and penalized marriage. Heritage's Robert Rector writes, when the war on poverty began, 7% of children were born outside marriage. Today, 42% of children are. And children in single-parent homes are more than 5 times as likely to be poor. For poverty fighting, we need more marriage and less welfare. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Perhaps you have thoughts about the campaign in your particular arena, and maybe you've been following it. What about the pro-life message? We'd love to get your comments. 1-800-351-1212. Have a round table of guests, and we will add another one in the next hour, but let's go around the round table and talk about the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare. Marjorie, you first. It seems to me that we always sort of suspected that. I never heard National Abortion Rights League or Planned Parenthood come before Congress and say, you need to have a section here on abortion. So that told me maybe behind the scenes there was a nod and the wink saying, oh, we'll get you covered. And now we're finding out, as we suspected, that some people actually are paying for abortion. And when they try to find out if their subsidies are paying for abortion, they really can't find out. What have you found?
You know, you're right about the nod and wink. That really did actually happen during the debate on health care, when there was no statute in the bill, when there was no amendment in the bill to keep abortion funding from flowing from the taxpayer. There was this sort of sense, and then there was an executive order. There was a sort of a sense and a communicated sense from the leadership and then among the Democrats that, don't worry about that executive order thing. It's going to be okay. These were sort of back alley sort of conversations. But now what we're seeing is what we said was going to happen really is now happening. The General Accounting Organization came out with a report, said, yes, indeed, this is happening. Abortions are being funded in insurance plans all across the country. And we said this was going to be the case. And in fact, there were many congressmen that lost their seats over this because they were the last holdout in all this. And so this is the very issue that we will be communicating very strongly in the Senate races that are so close. And, the citizens there really need to know. They really are going to care. And we're already seeing much evidence that their votes are shifting in the right direction because of this very issue. So we can change the whole system, get a new Senate, and fix this healthcare debacle once and for all.
Debbie, remember when we had the so-called blue dog Democrats, and they were pro-life Democrats, and they said, we have to have some assurance that these funds will not go to abortion. Remember, the president said, we'll sign an executive order, and some people believe that. And I want to now tell those blue dog Democrats I have some swampland that I'd like to sell them as well, right? Didn't we find out how unimportant that was?
Yes, we sure did. Yep. Once we're going to have the government providing health care and the issue of abortion is framed as a health care thing, it seems impossible to ever have kept it out. And that's exactly where the left was headed with it. A similar thing was the executive order that said that health insurers or that employers had to provide for abortion, they had to provide contraception in their insurance, which led to the Hobby Lobby thing. But that's another way in which the Obamacare Act ended up having abortion-producing drugs covered by and protected by federal law. That's a bit of a stretch, but it's the same kind of theory to it. It's going to, in some hidden way, we're going to make sure that those of you who want to have abortion-producing drugs can get them.
Frank, that gets us back to Hobby Lobby and all the other issues as well. Your thoughts?
Well, on the abortion issue specifically, an estimate done by the Charlotte Lozier Institute, which I'm not introducing a new website to the program.
We do have a few.
It is a part of the Susan B. Anthony list, estimates that there's going to be 100 and somewhere in 110,000, 150,000 more abortions a year based on the changes in the law. Now, you can't have two things happening at the same time. The law changes nothing, which is the way it's being reported. It maintains all the Hyde Amendment. It stays the same in law. There's no change, and have 150,000 more abortions. It is false on the face of it. Yes. Has always been false. Mm-hmm. And now we have the Government Accounting Office verifying that by not being able to find any plans that actually collect money from individuals to pay for separate abortion provision in their plans.
Marjorie, we went through this really complex system so that theoretically the money wouldn't have. I mean, this was so archaic and Byzantine. It looks like something out of the Middle Ages, and then it still didn't work. I mean, it just seems to me that you don't blame a lot of our listeners who call in and say, I don't trust the government at all anymore.
I mean, the whole thing happened because it's so easy to confuse, because it is confusing. Mm-hmm. It's a very confusing issue, and it became confused because this gimmick was so convoluted and so hard to follow that it became very clear in the end. Everybody had in their minds, the public had in their minds, gee, looks like they stopped abortion funding. Members of Congress didn't want to look very carefully because the Blue Dog Democrats really wanted to vote for this. And in the end, it just was so confused. They thought it was taken care of. They voted for it. And now it is here. It's been visited upon us. And I got to say, we fought for 4 years in a suit about this because we said that a congressman voted for taxpayer funding of abortion. He sued us, and we overturned a law in Ohio so that we could actually speak the truth again, which we won.
Yes,
and
did.
So, without question, we were going to continue to speak. Even if we lost, we would continue to speak. But this, taxpayer funding of any abortion, including late-term abortion, to be revealed right now, I mean, that is a game changer, as long as people communicate this to the voters.
Let me come around the table just real quickly before we take our next break and talk about what people can find at your website. And one of the questions, Marjorie, that I know our listeners have is, you know, during the primary, everybody claims to be a conservative. Everybody claims to be pro-life. That doesn't mean anything, but you have taken the time to vet the candidates, have you not?
Oh, yes. I mean, it's we take it very seriously. We have a rigorous questionnaire. It's pretty much based on what we believe they will need to vote on, but also a dig down. Then we have a very rigorous conversation, kind of a murder board style, prepare for a debate type conversation so that they feel that they're really ready. Usually they're not. Usually I'm not. Yeah. You know, if we always have to refine and do better and sharpen the saw. And then we also have a training video that's made especially for campaign staff and for the candidates themselves to look at and prepare. So it's not a game. It's not for kids. It's for grown-ups who are representing their constituents and have a responsibility to do it very well.
Frank, let me come to you for just as well, because we've already talked about the Susan B. Anthony list, and we certainly want to have people know more about American Principles Project and talk about some of the resources that are available to our listeners as they go to your website.
Well, we deal with a much wider range of issues, and probably the one issue that your listeners would be most interested in is our fight against Common Core. Mm-hmm. And that the resources of what's happening there, what is really an attack on the institutions of family and the rights of states and localities and parents eventually to control the education of their children, how it's being undermined, and what's being done state by state to do it. You'll get a good set of resources if you're a parent wanting to fight this in your local school district, or you want to join others. Go to our website, AmericanPrinciples.org. And remember, the other website I mentioned was OperationTexas.org.
Yes, Operation Texas. And we're going to talk more about that in the second hour because we're going to get into it in real detail, but I wanted to mention that. Let's take a phone call real quickly, just to take one quick one. Here we'll go to Georgia. Dwayne, what would you like to share to our roundtable today?
Yes, I just want to say that if Republicans are going to win these races, they need to get out and let the people know where they stand on these issues like abortion, Common Core, and other things like border enforcement. They can't just decide which issues they're going to talk about and then decide not to talk about the other, because if they do that, they will continue to lose these elections. The people have a right to know where they stand on all these key issues. Like Common Core, for example, they need to let the people know that the government has no right telling school administrations how to educate children in the public school. That should be left up to administrators and the children's parents. And let the people know that abortion is murder, and that they will do everything they can to get rid of abortion, rather going to the having the decision.
Sure. I unfortunately got to go to a break, so I think we got the point. But bold colors, as Ronald Reagan said. I grew up in California. He was my governor, and I remember that very speech, instead of these pale pastels. So, Marjorie, last comment.
I love this caller, and I hope you keep calling back because you're singing our song. Transparency is everything, and the voters deserve to know who they're voting for, and can only know if we tell them, and the candidates themselves. Thank you.
Second hour, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about this particular outreach in the state of Texas, and I want all of you in other states to listen and see if this was something you'd want to do in your state as well. We'll continue our conversation with a roundtable right after these important messages.
Across the nation, this is Point of View. For materials offered during the broadcast, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number 1-800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour today, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Debbie Georgatos with us, Marjorie Dannenfelser, as well as Frank Cannon. We're going to introduce someone else to the mix, but before we do so, we've been talking about OperationTexas.org, and I thought, Frank, I might come to you for just a minute before we go to Dr. Adam Schaeffer to kind of give the vision for this for just a minute, because we are talking about how important the pro-life issue is, but how can we be more effective in that pro-life message? And we'll use the state of Texas for the next couple of minutes to illustrate exactly what's taking place here.
Well, for years now, the Democratic Party has gone after women in the Republican Party and found out if you're single, if you have high education, if you have certain other characteristics, there's a high chance that the abortion issue might work with you. There's a larger segment within the Democratic Party that if you're religious, if you are a woman with children, if you are a woman who is in a lower income household, you're much more likely to vote pro-life. And what we have to do is do what the Democrats do. Test the messages, understand what works with what groups, and do what businesses are doing now, which is market to the individual, not throw out an argument on television and do it across the board, but go ahead and find the people who specifically will be attracted to that message. And your next guest, Adam Schaeffer, is somebody who's leading the charge on the conservative side on this. And what he's found about pro-life and Democratic women voters, I think, is a breakthrough. And in Texas, he's going to do that along with targeting Hispanic voters. I think it's the most exciting political movement in the pro-life cause.
Well, again, I had a chance to hear him recently, and I wanted to give all of our listeners a chance to hear from Dr. Adam Schaeffer. He is the Director of Research and co-founder of Evolving Strategies, has his Ph.D. in American Politics from the University of Virginia, also a master's degree in social science, but has worked in a couple of campaigns and in this area, I guess we could call it micro-targeting. So, Adam, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Well, thank you very much for having me on.
Tell us a little bit about what this is doing and how you go about it, because Frank was saying sometimes the Democratic Party is light years ahead of the Republican Party in terms of the strategy, and it's your feeling that we don't have to guess about how a particular message works. We can test it. Explain what you do.
Sure. I think the simplest way to explain it is we test messages and tactics in the same way that you'd test a new drug treatment in a medical clinical drug trial. So we pull out we randomly assign people to a control placebo group that gets nothing or some kind of content that's not political, and then assign other people to treatment groups to receive a message. Then we poll into that universe after we deliver that message a day or two afterward, and we measure people's vote preferences, pro-life, pro-choice, self-identification, that kind of thing, and compare the results in the treatment group to the control group. It's all objective, and what we're doing is observing the impact instead of asking people what they think of a message. We're actually observing how it's impacting their vote preference and other opinions in the field, without any bias or without having to have a person kind of introspect and say, well, what do I think of this message? Would it really impact me? Because a lot of times people are very bad at predicting how they'll respond to something or how they'll behave.
Now, sometimes in West Texas, they use the phrase, not your first rodeo. And it might be fair to say, this is not your first rodeo. We have listeners in states like Virginia and Florida and other places. You've tested this out and found some very intriguing results, haven't you?
We have. It's interesting. The first time we tested a pro-life message was in the Virginia gubernatorial election with Terry McAuliffe and Ken Cuccinelli. Some of your listeners might know the election. It was one of the only things going on last year in 2013. The abortion issue was really a big part of the campaign, but really only on one side. It was Democrats attacking Ken Cuccinelli for supposedly wanting to ban birth control, and an attack on him with the whole war on women approach, that he hated women, he was out to harm them in some way. But there was really very little on our side attacking Terry McAuliffe for his extreme positions on the issue of abortion, late-term abortion, taxpayer funding, that kind of thing. So we threw that into the mix of a test before the election and found that it was the most effective. In fact, it was the only clearly effective one, and that it worked seemingly with women in Democratic households the best. We followed that with a project that we conducted for Susan B. Anthony in Florida, Florida 13, a special congressional election, where, again, the war on women theme was out there, but not a whole lot on the other side. Tested it out there again and found, again, the same pattern of results and pretty significant results. Pretty surprising in terms of conventional wisdom that the best people to target and the people who moved most seem to be, again, Democratic women, weak Democratic women. I think there's a lot of reasons potentially for that. One is simply that they are unlikely to have heard any of the negative aspects about the candidates they support. A lot of these women consider themselves pro-choice, but even most pro-choice, self-identified pro-choice voters are not for late-term abortion or taxpayer funding. They have their limits, and a lot of the candidates, most of the candidates on the Democratic side, oftentimes support the most extreme position you could possibly hold on the pro-life side. And when that is introduced, it can be very disruptive.
Marjorie, let me come to you for just a minute, because I think there are pro-life candidates that if they found out that a particular voter identified himself or herself as pro-choice, they'd say, okay, I'll just keep on going. What I'm hearing from Adam is that isn't necessarily the case.
That's the problem with labels, like pro-choice and pro-life. Most pro-choice people think they're pro-choice. They don't think that pro-choice means I'm for late-term taxpayer-funded abortion.
Yes.
They're thinking maybe abortion's only available in the first 3 months anyway. So what it does, and what Adam's doing, is clarifying what in fact are we talking about, and are you in fact for that, or are you not? That is clarity in terms of the question, and clarity in terms of how we target.
Well, fascinating. We need to take a break, but Adam, when we come back, I'd love to have you explain for just a minute what you want to be doing and are already doing in the state of Texas. We've encouraged people to find out a little bit more by going to operationtexas.org. And Frank, you can give us a little more vision there. And Debbie, I know you've been kind of following this as well. So we're all going to come around the table, give you a little bit more of an understanding of this. It's a little bit of an insider kind of presentation, but it's the kind of thing that I know the point of view listeners want to know more about. Because if this is successful, as it already seems to have been in Virginia and Florida, now in Texas, you can roll this out to a lot of different states and a lot of different campaigns. So this is, I think, very important. That's why we wanted you to know a little bit more about that. And as we've mentioned before, you can find out more about each one of our guests around the round table, including Evolving Strategies. We have that link on our website, as well as the ones for Susan B. Anthony List, American Principles. And, of course, the one we've been mentioning now the last few moments, operationtexas.org. Let's take a break. We'll come back and continue our conversation with the roundtable right after these important messages.
The Point of View Commentary with Kerby Anderson.
Yesterday, I talked about the new book by Gary Chapman and Arlene Pellicane, Growing Up Social, Raising Relational Kids in a Screen-Driven World. Today, I'd like to come back to one arresting set of statistics that illustrated the importance of reading. If you look at the latest statistics from the Kaiser Family Foundation on media, you will see that over the last decade, every form of media consumption has increased from children ages 8 to 18. Hours watching television have increased, and so have hours spent in front of a computer, video game, and many other digital devices. Only one activity has decreased: reading. In their book, they cite a study that demonstrates the importance of reading at home. Consider this comparison of 3 students with 3 very different reading habits. Student A reads 20 minutes a day, which works out to be 3,600 minutes per school year. Student A also encounters about 1,800,000 words, and even more encouraging is the claim that this student will eventually score in the 90th percentile on standardized tests. Student B reads 5 minutes a day. That works out to 900 minutes per school year. The student encounters about 282,000 words and is likely to score in the 50th percentile on standardized tests. And student C reads an average of 1 minute a day. That works out to merely 180 minutes per school year. And student C only encounters about 8,000 words per year, and this student is likely to score in the 10th percentile on standardized tests. This comparison and other studies that show the importance of reading illustrate one of the greatest dangers in a digital world. Children are reading less because digital devices are distracting them and enticing them. We face some significant challenges in this digital age. The decline in reading is one of the greatest concerns. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, we have a roundtable of guests here and one by phone. Dr. Adam Schaeffer with us for a few more minutes. And if you would like to know more about this particular outreach, the first link now is operationtexas.org. So you can click on there and it tells you about the Texas Gubernatorial Project. And Dr. Adam Schaeffer, let me have you for just a minute talk about what you want to do in the state of Texas. We've talked about what you did in Virginia and in Florida. What's happening here in the state of Texas, and what can people in other states maybe benefit from this as this is successful and is maybe a model for what can happen in many future campaigns?
Sure. Well, we had the opportunity to work with the Texas Gubernatorial Project that you mentioned, OperationTexas.org. We have done some preliminary testing on different messages and different angles on the pro-life message, are doing another round actually coming up this week as well to hone the messaging and the targeting to find the individuals that will respond best to new information about the life issue and what pro-choice and pro-life policies really mean in a practical sense. This is going to be then executed during the campaign, and we're going to test there as well so we get more information coming out of the campaign. And I think we could have a huge impact on the margin here and in other states. We're involved with other states as well. This coming out of this election, I think we can really shift potentially the outcome of some Senate elections in Texas. Things look pretty good, but there's always some uncertainty there. And at the very least, we can demonstrate we can move non-traditional groups that usually aren't communicated to by our side of the aisle toward our side, and really short-circuit a lot of the efforts that are going around in Texas and other parts of the country, the Turn It Blue efforts, which they've been very successful at. Colorado went from all red to all blue in a very, very short period of time. And they did that because they concentrated on the ground game, but also on the research, on finding out who to talk to, how to talk to them, and how to move more of the electorate toward their side. So I think this is going to be a model coming out of this election heading into 2015 and 2016 to show how we can actually change the electorate, win the argument, and win elections as well.
Marjorie, I noticed that you are the first person to endorse it there on the website, so obviously you think that this has a lot of potential, not just in the state of Texas, because we are broadcasting in 43 other states, but what does this mean for the future of the pro-life movement?
It's transformational, potentially. There are already signs that it is, without question, the best technique that's been able to use, but forget techniques. We're reaching people with a new message they've never heard before.
Right.
We haven't believed, perhaps, in the power of our own ideas yet to present them to people who we were maybe afraid. Well, now we're finding our ideas are very powerful. They should be hearing them. They're hearing them. They will be hearing them in Texas. We're using this in Iowa as well. Very close Senate race there. Two things are important: that you win, number one, and that people know why you won. That winning on the abortion issue means helping to close the margin of victory on Election Day as well. Very important for many reasons, especially within Republican mainstream establishment circles, and to the Republican consultants to tend to have a stranglehold on a lot of campaigns.
Debbie, you've been at some of these events where they've been promoting this. This is pretty unique, and in some respects is what I've seen the Democratic Party doing with micro-targeting and all the rest. I hate to say it, but some of the pro-life and Republican groups are a little bit late to the game, but at least they were in the game, right?
That is very true. You know, just a few years ago, we talked about how the conservative side was slow to getting around to using social media, slow to getting around using Twitter and Facebook, not realizing the power of it. And this is a similar thing. Unfortunately, the left tapped into more focused campaigning on issues, more focused persuasion of various groups. And we tend to think, we say truth, it is true, everyone has to know this. And so we didn't really, I don't think until recently, recognize the power we could bring to our message by doing it in a more focused, really scientific way. I just love this project. I love the idea behind it, I love the thinking, I love the research first, and then going after it. I think could be very, very consequential in Texas.
Frank, let me come to you as well, because I know that all of us around the table at one time or another have made contributions to candidates and parties and things like that. But it would certainly be more encouraging to me when I'm writing out my check to know that I am giving to a campaign or I'm giving to an ad that has truth tested, market tested, and is more effective than just, well, we think this is going to work. So there is a sense in which that might be even encouraging to people that would want to support some of these candidates.
I think that is undoubtedly true. The reality that's been talked about from the beginning of your show, from the Values Voters Report through all of the segments, is there is a dichotomy in the Republican Party between some of the people who have an intensity. Your caller, I hope, runs for office.
Yes.
And I'm going
Call back.
Yeah, by the way, I need to get some more callers in a minute, but we'll get to those.
and I would certainly contribute to him as but that intensity that you were mentioning before is the key to this, and the intensity can be there if you're confident your message is going to the right people. You can energize your base, which people in the Republican Party, consultants say, be quiet on this issue, never talk about it. You don't have the intensity in your base. Obama has shown that you can win with greater intensity of your base and less persuasion of the middle than any other president in the history of this country. And the second thing is you're spending money effectively, leveraging your dollars. If you're not throwing up TV ads, but actually having targeted messages to individual people.
Adam, explain a little bit more about what this looks like, because some of our listeners normally think about a typical TV ad, but you're talking about a lot more. So explain what that looks like.
Well, a lot of the testing we've done is in modes of contact that often get kind of overlooked. I think because they're used in the wrong way sometimes. We've tested robocalls, and we've tested online ads. We've also tested mail, direct mail. And one of the common features that seems to come out of it is that not every mode of contact is good for everything or every message, but with the right combination of message, images, voice, and the target, these can be extraordinarily powerful. So TV ads could be very, very powerful. There's not a lot of study of those, but they're broadcast. It's hard to target particular households, particular individuals, which makes it extraordinarily difficult to deliver a very powerful message that shifts the electorate to a significant degree. Because you're going to get a lot of people, if you have a strong message, a focused message, that react poorly. We did find some backlash in some of our messaging among some groups. So broadcast is really limiting in a lot of ways because it can't be contained. You can't talk to a person or a similar group of people about one topic from a point of view that might resonate with them. And a lot of people care about different things. They might, on the issue of healthcare, be more concerned about cost or coverage or some other factor. Some of the life issues involved with Obamacare. Speaking to people from their point of view and what's most important to them, I think, is what is really key here. And it's difficult to do that if you can't target people directly, or at least households.
Well, I just realized I had not mentioned the fact that you also had tried this out in Texas on the Democratic side, didn't you? In the primary, didn't you?
Yes, we were not involved in that particular test, but
You've just watched it, okay.
Life and the Texas Gubernatorial Project, they did run some radio ads against Wendy Davis in particular areas in the south of Texas, I believe, and found some very significant movements there toward an opponent during that primary, where my understanding is Wendy Davis really underperformed what was expected of her.
So again, it's not like this is new. In some respects, you've had some great opportunities. But just before we go, talk again about how people can get involved, because we have some of the links, including to OperationTexas.org, as well as some of the other organizations. But we have a lot of activists listening to this program, and a good number of them are in Texas. But even if they're outside of the state of Texas, what can they do, and what can they learn from some of the things that you've been able to do research on?
Well, I think obviously supporting organizations that are aggressively pursuing new lines of attack and using money that they get from donors most wisely. Susan B. Anthony list, American Principles Project, Texas Gubernatorial Project, all these are really leading the way in this respect. And spreading the word that we don't have to give up. We don't have to resign ourselves to losing the country and losing the argument because the media is against us or because we're outworked on the ground. There are things that we can do, that we are doing, that can radically change the electorate and landscape very quickly. The Democrats did it in a very short amount of time. We can do it too. We have actually the better argument on our side. If we work harder, if we work smarter, I think there's a huge amount of hope for this election and the future.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we'll take some phone calls. And so some of you that are on the line, stay with us. I look out there in the observation booth there, and I see, guess who? Representative Louie Gohmert. So I've got to see if we can get him on a segment here as well. So we'll see what we can pull together. It's more the merrier today here on Point of View.
It's a party Friday.
So we're having lots of fun, and I hope that you're learning. But also, if you'd like to join our conversation, we will get to some of those phone calls. 1-800-351-1212. See, one of our callers wants to ask Frank Cannon a question. So, Frank, you got to stick around just long enough at least to answer that question before you head on to your next venue, and we will take a break. We have all the links that you need on our website today, and we've been talking about the one OperationTexas.org, but of course we also have Susan B. Anthony list, the American Principles Project, and Evolving Strategies, as well as some information on the Values Voter Summit. And even if you're not there, you can actually watch it or even watch it after the fact. So those are all on the website. We'll take a break and continue our conversation with how many more people we're going to get in the studio right after this.
You are listening to Point of View. For materials offered during the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. Point of View will continue after this. are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, and we are having a party here, so if you want to actually watch this on our live cast, we actually have more people than we have microphones. We didn't anticipate that, but fortunately we at least have the earphones and everything for everybody, and we will take your phone calls, 1-800-351-1212, and let me go to one, because Frank, I think there is an individual, Jerry in Illinois, would like to ask you a question. So Jerry, you have the opportunity to ask that question.
Hi, thanks for taking my call. Big-time fan of the American Principles Project. First-time caller. I just wanted to, it seems like this Common Core battle, Mr. Kane, do you think it's a politically viable option for candidates running for political office to fight the Common Core right now?
Well, I think fighting the Common Core is the only viable option there is, if you would actually like to get elected in most states, and certainly if you want to get the Republican nomination in most states. The grassroots, individual moms, but also people who are not politically affiliated, don't want to see education directed from Washington. They want to see education directed locally through the parents. And that is a fundamental principle, has been for a long time, and when it's violated, the voters are unhappy.
Let's, if we can, maybe move the microphone over there, because one of the things I wanted to do is see if we could hear from the BFF of Eric Holder. We played that yesterday, Louie, in which he actually referred to you as buddy.
Yeah, we're buddies. I mean, so be careful what you say. He's my buddy. Yeah, we're BFFs,
DC kind of friend,
BFFs
right?
for life. Yeah, we're just.
Now, he is looking for a new job. Now, of course, he will not leave until they have someone else confirmed. I have no idea how long
I got a great idea for a job, and I would be willing to.
What could Eric Holder do in the future?
I think he would be the best person I can think of. We could do it as a commission or straight line salary, to have him go to Mexico to the drug cartels and get those 2,000 weapons that were sold to the drug cartels on his watch. Who would be better than Eric Holder to go get our weapons back from the drug cartels?
Raise your hand if you're for that idea.
That'd be okay. Yeah, so we're all for that.
Yeah.
I think it'd be a popular job. And his popularity has suffered some as he has turned a blind eye toward things he should have investigated, like the IRS, like Fast and Furious, like some of these other things. This would really help his popularity. I mean, he goes and he gets these weapons back.
You're thinking of him?
I think Congress would be ready to drop the whole Fast and Furious investigation if he could get our weapons
that Louie
back.
Gohmert was going to be a political consultant to Eric Holder for his future candidacy. For what office is he going to run?
Well, who would have thought we'd be buddies? But, once I found out we were buddies, then, let's see if we can hire him to go get those guns back.
Brilliant.
Well, we did talk about Eric Holder at the very beginning, and we are talking about this issue of abortion, but I'd like to go around the roundtable one more time, because it does seem to me that we've heard a little bit here from Dr. Adam Schaeffer about what is happening here in the state of Texas. And Marjorie, I think this is maybe a real opportunity to encourage pro-life candidates in other states. Don't be on the defensive, be on the offensive. Put your opponent on the defensive, and also recognize that you perhaps have conceded too many individuals to the other side. With the right kind of targeting and the right kind of message, you can win a very significant majority.
I agree. This is a true breakout moment. And as you said a little while ago, the only alternative to testing and figuring out whether your message is true and it works is guessing. And you don't really want to leave these types of decisions to political consultants in Washington to go with their gut, because their gut is almost always the opposite of what American people's gut really is and what their beliefs are. This is a breakout moment. That the consequence has to be said, though. It will be a political win without question. Its impact on the presidency, the 2016 run-up to the presidency in terms of the Republican primary for the presidential candidates, but then also the argument, the debate among the Democrat and the Republican presidential candidates themselves will be changed potentially if we do it right and we do it well. The consequences, it has to be said in the end, though, are only for the unborn. and the mothers that are suffering with their death every single day. Not to bring down the party atmosphere here, but that is actually what we're all about here.
Frank, I'd love to get your comments, and she reacted.
Marjorie's absolutely right. In a moral case, there is, late-term abortion. If we were to outlaw it, you'd save 15,000 children a year. Any one of us would run out of the studio to save one kid across the street, or especially 15 kids across the street. You'd be saving 1,000 times that if this law was passed. And I want to say in regard to 2016, the Republican Party will not win unless it gets its base energized, unless it gets Hispanic voters to vote for them in higher numbers than they have.
Yes.
And then it gets Reagan Democrats to come back to being Republicans again. There is no better issue than going on the defense of unborn children and talking about the extremism of our opponents to get all three of those goals done.
Well done. Let me come to Debbie and then move the microphone over because I'd love to hear from Louie Gohmert. But Debbie, any comments about what we've said so far?
Just three quick ones. I love the simple messaging. The war on women thing, people can repeat and remember that mantra and say it over and over. I love the simple messaging that you all are talking about. Just the idea that this is taxpayer-funded abortions. People thought that wasn't going to happen. Just saying that, accusing them, let them respond or justify that. And also late-term abortion. Even people who think that they're pro-choice, they don't really mean when you're 6 months pregnant. That's not what they're thinking about. And one other message, and I have not done this research, but always seems to me the pure number of abortions that have occurred since Roe versus Wade was, that ruling is handed down are so staggering. And some simple message about we just can't ignore those numbers anymore. It's staggering.
Yeah, and the fact is that last night I heard someone who was a son of a Holocaust victim and saying, we killed 6 million in the Holocaust, but now we're coming up to 60 million. I mean, 10 times that. And even looking around in the audience and having some people kind of go, we are used to those numbers, but most people are not. The lower information voters are not. Just to get that information out would be really significant. Representative Louie Gohmert, love to get your thoughts about this.
Well, and Margie and I have talked, and we were together this morning. The work that she and the Susan B. Anthony List folks are doing is just extraordinary. And in the Judiciary Committee, we were having a hearing on abortion, and a doctor who had done, I forget, over 1,000, I can't remember the number exactly, but countless abortions, he was all for them. He did them. He was making a lot of money doing them. And, sometimes we can get into a job and just put our mind in neutral and just do it, and that's where apparently he got to. And then it hit him because in these late-term abortions, I didn't know. I've been pro-life, but I didn't know. And as he described what they did, any of us that have had children, especially like my wife and I had a daughter prematurely, 8 to 10 weeks, and to think about somebody doing to that child what he described, where you go in, you feel around, he said, and you can't bring the child out, the cervix isn't dilated, so what you have to do, feel around, and when you feel the biggest bump, that's the head. If you come to that first, then you rip that off and pull that out. And when you feel a leg or an arm and you pull those off, you're dismembering this little child in the womb. And if people knew what was going on, you would just have to say nobody in America had a heart to believe that they would not get on board with us on this issue. There's just no way. There are that many heartless Americans. You think about pulling a baby apart and immediately you say, we got to get on board. This just isn't right. And I really believe in the hearts of Americans that that's where they're going to be when they find out they really understand what's going on.
Margie, I was just thinking about the PBS special they did a while back. It was this documentary, Beyond Tiller. And, of course, you learn a little bit about what happened to these individuals that are still engaged in post-abortion or, third trimester abortions, those kinds of things. And I was just struck by the fact that PBS will get into the details, but they wouldn't tell any of the story that we just heard from Louie Gohmert.
No, and I want to thank you for telling it because, nobody wants to hear that. None of us. I don't hear it very often myself, and we do this every day, but it's got to be heard. We're one of 7 nations that doesn't restrict after 20 weeks, after 5 months, halfway through pregnancy. And you know who we're in? North Korea, China, Singapore, Vietnam. That's not good company.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue our conversation. If you'd like to join us, we haven't done real good at getting some of the calls on, but we'll do that if we can. 1-800-351-1212. Let me mention again, we have the links to operationtexas.org. Please, if you would go there and find out a little bit more about what we've talked about today with Marjorie, with Frank, and with Adam. We certainly would appreciate you taking the time to visit that website as well as many of the others. We'll come back with your phone calls and our conversation right after this.
This year marks the 50th anniversary of President Lyndon Johnson's War on Poverty. Since its inception, we spent $22 trillion on it. Last year alone, we spent $943 billion on federal and state welfare programs. And what do we have to show for it? The U.S. Census Bureau recently released its annual report on the poverty rate. It shows that there's really no change. Around 14% of Americans are still poor. But if we look at the standard of living of those classified as poor by the Census Bureau, we see a very different picture than we did back in the 60s. The Heritage Foundation's premier poverty expert, Robert Rector, points out that census counts a family as poor if its income falls below specified thresholds. But in counting family income, census ignores nearly this entire $943 billion welfare state. According to Heritage, over 100 million people, about a third of the American population, received aid from at least one of the nation's 80 means-tested welfare programs in 2013. This statistic does not include Social Security, Medicare, or unemployment insurance. As a result, the actual living conditions of those classified as poor have been improving for decades. Less than 2% of the poor are homeless. The typical person defined as poor lives in a home that is in good repair, not crowded, and larger than the average dwelling of a non-poor French, German, or English citizen. Robert Rector also points out that this census-identified poor family's home has air conditioning, cable or satellite TV, and a computer. 40% have a widescreen HGTV, and another 40% have internet access. 3/4 have a car. About 2/3 have 2 or more cars. Surveys by the U.S. Department of Agriculture show the poor mostly reporting that they were not hungry even for a day during the prior year. It's good that Americans are not suffering from deprivation the way they were decades ago, but this is not because more people are providing better lives for themselves and their families. The war on poverty was declared to increase self-sufficiency, not to create a bigger and bigger welfare state with more and more people dependent upon the government. President Johnson declared that the war on poverty would shrink the welfare rolls. It hasn't happened. So is the war on poverty a failure because the poverty rate is virtually unchanged? Or is it a success because poverty isn't nearly as terrible as it was before these programs began? It's a failure. Its programs have discouraged work and penalized marriage. Heritage's Robert Rector writes, when the war on poverty began, 7% of children were born outside marriage. Today, 42% of children are. And children in single-parent homes are more than 5 times as likely to be poor. For poverty fighting, we need more marriage and less welfare. For Point of View, I'm Penna Dexter.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, our weekend edition here. And Marjorie, let me come to you for just a minute, because when we talk about what we need to do to communicate our views, I know you're going to talk about, because I wanted you to talk about Bernard Nathanson, who used to be on this program with us occasionally. This week we actually had Sherry Richard on as well. Windows to the Womb. And that was the first video she ever produced, and now she has a whole series of others. But sonograms, ultrasound really changed this debate. And one of those people that was influenced by that was Bernard Nathanson.
That is correct. And what an incredible story that everyone should know. He was the most prolific abortionist in the Western Hemisphere.
Yes.
He was a founder of NARAL. Grew up in a Jewish environment, but not with any religious views. He got to the point that he was doing so many abortions, and he never felt it. And he said sincerely, he had to abort his own child.
Wow.
And when he reflected back on it later, he didn't have to. He chose to abort his own child. And he said, I truly didn't feel anything but the pride of great expertise as a doctor, that I'd done it completely. And he said, I mean that. I'm telling the truth. But it just goes to show about what happens to the human conscience. Allows you to be a child abuser, allows you to do all sorts of horrible things, allows you to behead a baby without feeling it, allows you to do all sorts of things that we forget that in communicating, often there are many, many layers of the onion that we have to get through.
Wow. The value of an ultrasound, though, very significant. And even last night when I was speaking, the statistics I've heard from everything from Council for Life and various ministries and even Jim Dobson, usually about 90%. When a woman who maybe is abortion-minded, if she does make it into a pregnancy resource center and sees that image, almost 90% of the time, even if they were abortion-minded, they change their mind once they see what's in the womb.
All of a sudden, mother and child and the bond between is just ignited. If you didn't feel it before and you see, you just can't help it. And everything in a mother is to protect that child. So something is truly wrong when our culture and our society sends her to a place and says that bond is not natural, that somehow your freedom is going to be.
Well, and one of the things about abortion that breaks my heart is about the role of men, how it is men have let our society down. Because let's face it, if a man really respected, admired, loved the woman that together they had brought together a child, if he truly loved and admired and cared so deeply, most women would not want to be running and destroying that life. No. And so I know it's a bond that now I've been called a mother several times, but I don't think it was a compliment. But
it was just the beginning.
But there's no way a man could ever know that kind of feeling. I mean, there's just a bond between a child and a mother that is irreplaceable.
That's true. It absolutely is. It's the most natural thing, this love of babies. And, it really is true for women, even grandmother age. Women notice babies in the grocery store, they're sitting in the cart in front of them. Women just are naturally drawn to babies in general. And then your own child, all those stories you hear about a woman lifting up a wheel at the edge of a bus because her child's trapped underneath, just all sorts of, you think how with your own babies, you do anything to protect them. And you wouldn't, if someone offered you all the money in the world, you wouldn't give your child away. And so that is the natural and God-given instinct for moms. And so the reason in part we have this horrific record of abortion is because there has been success in trying to convince women to dehumanize this whole process of pregnancy and what you're carrying inside. It's a dehumanizing. It's an it instead of a baby. And so I love that the sonograms bring back, no, it's a baby.
Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony, who really ushered women into politics, clearly, because of suffrage. They both were united on this, as was every early suffragist and every early feminist. And Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, when we consider that women are treated as property, it's degrading to us when we treat our children as property to be disposed of as we see fit. And in the fight for women's suffrage and women's rights, the bond between woman and child was inextricable. They were a unit. There was no question about it.
Yeah. Susan B. Anthony, but then you have Margaret Sanger, and you recognize the two women that made such a difference. And one was for positive and one was for negative. But again, it just illustrates that. Again, I would encourage all of our listeners to really support the CareNet Crisis Pregnancy Center in their area because they are on the front lines for the pro-life.
But in Margaret Sanger's case, it was all about control of, a higher species that some people are just not worth keeping around. She had a different idea, and people don't realize what exactly was her motivation.
She had the idea of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who recently said, the whole idea of abortion was generally to keep certain populations down. Wasn't that the whole point?
Sure. Well, I mean, you can follow from Charles Darwin to Francis Galton to then the cousin of Charles Darwin to Margaret Sanger, a perfect line, and that is that idea that there are certain more evolved races. Remember, actually, the subtitle of The Origin of Species is More Favored Races.
Yeah.
So you had this idea that there were favorable races and unfavorable races. And so whether it was that and Oliver Wendell Holmes and all those individuals, that we need to get rid of useless eaters, we need to get rid of the imbeciles. Those are some of the kind of phrases they were used. And
yes.
That's kind of the history of Planned Parenthood. That,
and they still have the Margaret Sanger Award. They still give it.
They still call it. It's amazing they still call it that. They're not embarrassed.
You would think they would hide that. Louie?
Well, and from the pursuit that Marjorie's taken here, when you talk about the numbers of babies that are aborted and what race they are, so often conservatives are told, well, gee, you're a racist, you hate somebody because of the color of their skin. We're the ones that are saying we want every one of those African-American children, Hispanic American, it doesn't matter to us what color their skin is. They're a child of God, and we'd like to preserve them.
Pastor Stephen Broden, who ran for Congress a few years ago, has become a big activist talking about the notion that Planned Parenthood tends to locate their facilities around the country, largely in minority neighborhoods. And I'm sure many of your listeners know, but the percentage of abortions that occur within the black community are far higher than the percentage of blacks in American society. He views it as an assault, a Planned Parenthood assault on minority community in America.
About 37% of all abortions are in African-American community. They only represent 12% of the population. So you can see that the images and the ideas of Margaret Sanger still exist. We're just about out of time, and I want to make sure that we go around the round table and once again talk about the various websites. And Marjorie, talk about what is available, because the Susan B. Anthony list is one that we've listed there and want people to go there and find out more.
Well, ours is very exciting. It really is. There's a lot going on our website, and it's a door to every single thing that we're doing. I would recommend taking a look at one thing that I find very encouraging, and that's a project we just recently wrapped up, and that is receiving the letters from almost all of the presidential Republican primary candidates expressing their desire to advocate for the 5-month pain-capable bill. Very important to stake that claim right now and to make it part of the debate as we move into the presidential debates overall.
Very good. And I might just mention this as well. We have the American Principles Project. Frank Cannon has been with us. We have Evolving Strategies, and we talked with Adam Schaeffer, but of course the lead one there is OperationTexas.org. And Louie, I'll give you the last word, because we always love to hear you.
My staff always says Gohmert.com to get it out there, but I tell you, Marjorie's inspired something else. There are those people that some conservatives say, oh, we'll never get their vote. And it inspires me to think, there's one segment of the population that conservatives just say, I will never get their vote. They don't. I think we ought to be inspired to go after them today. And of course, I'm talking about the dead people. It's virtually, I'm not kidding, virtually 100% of the time when you find a dead person has voted, they vote Democrat. And I think that may be an area of the voting populace that we ought to pursue as well.
We need to get Adam on this. Maybe he could do some testing.
So let's don't write any group off.
I hope you have a great weekend. I have totally lost control of the program. And on Monday, we'll get back to all the issues. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for the help behind the scenes. We'll see you back here on Monday.
You have been listening to Point of View. For materials offered on the program, please write to Point of View, Post Office Box 30. That's Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Zip 75221. Or call our toll-free number, 1-800-347-5151. That's 1-800-347-5151.
Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries and is supported by your generous tax-deductible contributions.